Hi everyone, welcome to Product Unfiltered. It's been quite some time since we have recorded our episode, and this time we have a very special guest joining in, Abhishek Tiwari, who is the Chief Product Officer at Wiser. Abhishek, we are really grateful to have you on Product Unfiltered, and we would really appreciate if you can share some insights about your current role at Wiser and your product management journey.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Great to meet both of you, and great to have this podcast today. I've been, I'm Chief Product Officer at Wiser. We offer B2B SaaS products to brands and retailers, and the easiest way to think about it is that we help them get more insights into their consumer purchase journey and how to influence that and how to monetize, how to actually win in that space. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, product roles for like 20 plus years, and mostly leadership roles in the last 15 odd years. Um, Worked at companies of all sizes, small, medium, large, B2B products, B2C products, developer products even. I did my own startup at one point, right? And so it's been an interesting journey, and most of my recent focus now is thinking about, how do we think about the strategy and vision of the company, and how do we actually shape the future of our business to go achieve that vision. Second is to think about, especially in my role as a leader of the product and design organization, is how do we actually up level that functional maturity? How do we actually get better every day, which is helpful to other teams within the company and helpful to the business overall, and that delivers the end growth, right? And third is being growth aware, which like most companies we have to kind of focus on, right? So that's been at a high level what I do. I'm happy to go into any one of those areas, but it's been a wild ride so far. So I'm hopeful I can help a lot more people who are earlier in their journey.
So definitely, Abhishek. Also, before we talk more about your current role, because it's been close to 20 plus years in the industry, um, curious to know what triggered you in your early days to start your career in product. Any particular project or instance which happened with you, which motivated you or pushed you to pursue your career in the product space?
And
Yeah, yeah,
also,
that's a great
I'm,
question.
I'm sorry, Abhishek. I'm also to add to Rahul's point. When you mentioned it's been over 20 years since you have been in this industry in product, we are really curious. How was product management 20 years back? Because many of our guests says that they started product management 10 years back and it was very different. But you started way before that. So, I'm curious to learn about your journey there.
Yeah, that's the interesting question. So let me cover both. So my own personal journey, I started out as an engineer, and I was very fortunate to work on one of the coolest products initially. I was When I first moved to the country, I joined this company called Lightsurf. And if you look up Lightsurf, we are credited with inventing the camera phone. We actually invented camera phones back then. So we had both the hardware and the software. And I led the team to build the software, which eventually became MMS on our phones. It used to be called Picture Mail before. So if you're aware, SMS and MMS, we built out actually the first versions of MMS, and that was a very amazing journey because and with full of complexities, because back then there were no smartphones, there were no app stores, right? So the way to for you to build a product was to work with wireless carriers, work with handset developers or mobile manufacturers, and then get the product out. So it was like a B to B to C kind of a journey, right? And so I was on the engineering side, and this was early days of product management as well. Only few companies had that, right? Especially in the software side. And what I found myself is that in my role, I ended up asking a lot of these kind of business questions, the user questions, and trying to understand what exactly is happening here and understanding what the users are trying to do. And fortunately, my managers, my executives actually took notice of that, and actually they encouraged me to take that product role. And that kind of got me into that, right? And these are again early days, so it was like not quite sure like what are the best practices. Marty Kagan books were not around at that time, right? So you had to kind of figure out those things. So the initial part was very technical in nature, and then kind of evolved more business centric and kind of running the business. The second bit, which because to your point was like how it's evolved, right, over time. And my sense is that just to keep it super high level, initially it was a lot to do with being technically oriented. Like a product manager is very, often came out from engineering, teams, has understanding of the deep technology, needs to understand that, needs to have the respect of the team members and so on. Gradually, it became more about the user, more about the business, right? And I think
Mhm.
we are now in last 5 to maybe 7 years very much firmly into uh, a product manager being the expert of the problem and expert of the user, right? So if you hear experts like Shreyas Doshi or like Marty Kagan, and they're like talking about it, right? And in fact, often what I feel in my own role and my teams is that if actually somebody does come from a technology background, they actually have to take an extra step to actually remove that, because
Mhm.
what happens is as builders we are very solution oriented, and
Yes.
this job requires you to be problem oriented
Problem
and
oriented.
and and not jump to the solution very quickly and steep in that problem, right? So that's been a big change, right? When in product management, and I think that's a change for the better, because I think it grounds us in the problem, grounds us in the job to be done of the user or the customer, and then you can work your way backwards and figure out the technology or the solutions for it.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a very interesting take, Abhishek. In fact, Rahul and I were talking about this yesterday. So we both started our roles 6 months, 1 year back. We are new into product management, and as you mentioned, like currently we have all these frameworks that we follow from Marty Kagan, Shreyas Doshi, and product management is that sexy term in the market right now. Everybody wants to become a product manager, but when you actually get into a role of PMing, we realize that us and the friends around us who have been working in all that big tech, it's kind of not what we expected. Like there is a lot of program management involved, project management involved, and PMing in every different company is different. Some is really technical oriented, some you actually work with a business team. So this is also something that Rahul and me wanted to talk to you. How has it evolved, and is a product manager, that the guy who is currently a product manager is actually a product manager, or he is a project manager or a program manager when in the early days of PMing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And again, this space has been evolving, and thanks to the experts who are really pushing the limits and actually driving awareness broadly. And you're right. It takes different shapes and forms in many companies. And when it just remind me of a funny thing, like when people reach out to me and say that they want to become a product manager, there's a handy article, I'll have to look it up, but which I sent to them, which the article basically goes saying, you want to be product manager? And they ask you a bunch of questions like, do you like to be thanked for your job? Like, do you like to be
Yeah.
appreciated for your job? And do you like to have some space available in your calendar? If you answered yes and all of those things, then this is just not for you, right? And
Yeah.
the other funny anecdote you may have heard is that line from the Spider-Man movie, right? With great power comes great
Great
responsibility. Like the PM version is with no power comes all the responsibility, right? So you have to
responsibility.
be mentally prepared for that, right? So, but I think what's happened is the space has been evolving, and I think different companies, different industries are taking note of that. And my belief is in any company, even if they don't have a product person, somebody wears the hat. So if you
Yeah.
have a small startup, the founders end up wearing that hat, right? And they make those decisions because these are the key decisions you have to make about your market, your how what their job to be done is, how you're going to solve it, how you're going to meet that need, and how you're going to be successful. These are the key questions a product manager deals with. So somebody wears that hat. And at some point in a company, they have to make a decision on how do I bring in somebody who actually done that before and actually give it a little bit more structure. And this is what I was talking about, the functional maturity, right? How do you think about the functional maturity, which then brings the company along? And you have to be aware of what stage the company is, what space the company is, right? And accordingly adjust your processes to match that, right? Because a B2B company, of course, varies greatly with from a B2C company. And even within a B2B company, you have companies which are like Slack or Zoom, which look more of like a consumer company rather than compared to the other end of the spectrum where you have a high touch. company which has a very typical enterprise sales process, and how do you actually engage with that, right? Um, the other bit was project management. Yeah, I think what happens is product management in depend, and you have to wear multiple hats within that too, right? You have to be like you have to do some project aspects, some program aspects, some technical aspects, and so on. Now, depends on where that company is and what the awareness is. So as a
Mhm.
product leader in a company, your responsibility is not just to build the function out, build a team out, but drive the awareness in the company itself. And that's kind of been part of the journey I have had with Wiser and other companies. You have to go drive that awareness, that functional awareness. Because what happens is it's very important for other stakeholders to realize how product can actually assist them. Because in most companies, what you will see is that there are teams, like there are go-to-market teams or operations teams or engineering teams. And for the most part, they can operate as a good horizontal team structures and make their own decisions. A good product organization should work in a across the board horizontal fashion, right? And it needs to be the glue between these things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And once done effectively, that's when actually all the folks can find value for that. So that's another part of that, and
Mhm.
building those processes out that allows us to kind of get to that point. And frankly, as the company evolves, that's when you will have things like, oh, let's go build out a program management team, and they'll take that on,
Yeah.
right? And so that it's a journey. It's definitely a journey, right?
Mhm.
Because like if you ask any founder, when there are five people, they are doing everything. They're raising money,
Everything.
they're talking to the customers, and cleaning the floors, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
that's product managers. I have a little bit of that going on, depending on which
Yeah.
teams and
Yeah.
how early they are. But over time, you definitely want to drive maturity, because you have to make sure that you end up spending most amount of time on the most critical things around strategy, around customers, and so on.
Mhm. No, that's very true, Abhishek. Um, when you're saying about these things, right? I was just going through one of the posts I read some days back on LinkedIn. It says PM career ladder in a word. So for every different title, they give one word that basically resonates with the most of the things you do. So they say APM or the associate product manager, the keyword is learning. For product managers, it's doing. For group product manager, it's mastering. For directors, it's driving. For VP, it's amplifying. For CPO, it's predicting. So, do you agree to the words which I've spoken, or do you have any other words to describe to these particular titles, Abhishek?
Yeah, no, I think that that's actually a handy framework. I don't know who's authored that, but that actually sounds appropriate. The other one which comes to mind is from I may get his name wrong. Shishir, the guy who heads Coda. I think he had some
Mhm.
framework back from his Google days around. I think it was called PSHE, which was basically as somebody grows up, and first you like a junior PM, you give them a task, right? As you grow up, you actually get more of the you have to figure out the problem, right? And you grow up, you get the strategy, right? And that actually makes sense. And how do you think about that as you take on
Mhm.
more and more? But yeah, I think what you just laid out is absolutely key. The other bit I would add in there is to the functional maturity point, um, especially at the VP and the CPO level, is that what happens is in companies, especially mid to large companies, when you have multiple products and the complexity goes up, the likelihood of the senior leaders to actually work on a specific product goes down, right? So they are no
Mhm.
longer building features anymore directly. They are not coming up with it. They are not doing as much discovery sessions and so on, right? So how do you now influence that? I think one of the key mental shifts is you have to realize that your product now is the team which is building the product, right? So for
Mhm.
example, I say like my team is my product now.
Yeah.
And if I build the team better, they will end up building better products, right? So you have to think about that. This is the famous Elon Musk line, which is you build the machine which builds the machine, right? So that's the idea, and I think that's one of the key mental shifts people have to do, which is like they have to make sure that they are empowering the team, helping them build the best products.
Mhm.
not absolutely resonating with the points, Abhishek, that you mentioned. In fact, while you were sharing your journey, and specifically as a leader, as a chief product officer, we wanted to understand some insights from the lens of a CPO. So, a lot of the audience that listen to this podcast are early stage PMs or who want to become product managers in their career. But Abhishek, everybody talks about getting into product management and in great companies like Google, Amazon, Meta. But we also realize that every company has a certain product culture. So while you're interviewing with these companies, my first question is, how do you access the product culture? For example, I have worked across big companies like Cisco, some startups, and currently in a mid-sized company. And I realized if, as a product manager, the ladder in which you are reports to the chief product officer, the CPO, then definitely that's a product-led organization or the product-led group. But whereas, for example, your role does not report to a CPO. In some of the roles, my role directly reported to the CTO or the CMO. There, it was very product driven, that was rather a engineering driven or a marketing driven process. So similar to that, I just wanted to understand from you, from a CPO stand of point, if someone is looking to join a product manager role, are there some insights that you can share when the candidate can access the company or the product culture to which it's interviewing for?
Yeah, that's actually a very good nuanced question. Um, let me think about that. So I think there are, just to structure this a little bit, I think there are multiple ways to look at this. One, I think it would help to know what your goal is, right? And I think you got to start with like why you want to get into product manager management role, right? Like, is that because you heard something really amazing about it? Like, what is your end goal, right? And it could be like 5 years from now, I want to be at a certain level of company, or 10 years from now, or some point, I want to start my own company, right? Because the one of the amazing aspect of product role is you have a great vantage point in any company you join, right? You sit in a very central kind of viewpoint, and you have ability to access and observe how sales works, how ops works, how engineering works, how business works, right? And that visibility is actually, that's an amazing experience you pick up along the way, and you can use it in many different ways, and especially even to found your own companies. So I think it starts with that, and understanding what that objective is allows you to now figure out what you want to do. So, for example, if you want to be a product leader in a high functioning kind of thing, then you definitely want to join a high product maturity company. Like Google and Facebook are known to be high product maturity companies, right? Now, other places where there is no CPO or it reports in CTOs, that doesn't mean that they are not product oriented, right? I think the way to translate that would be that the product function may be early in maturity, but then what happens is, as I was saying before, the product hat is worn by many people, right? And might misquote him, but like Shreyas actually talks a lot about it in his videos, right? He joined Stripe famously, and he's been part of that. Stripe did not have a massive product team, right? But Stripe was a rocket ship, right? And it still is a rocket ship, right? And it's an amazing company if you want to work for, and then you can get to learn so much more, right? And that's another company where many people in many functions actually end up wearing the product hats and actually making those decisions, right? So what happens is, even if you don't have the org structure which looks like that, you
Yeah.
might actually have the overall company maturity that looks like that. And I think you need to, so as part of that journey, you have to go find the answers. Now, for bigger companies, well-known companies, these answers are available in many different places. Like, you can look it up online, you can look up from people's interviews and so on. But other places, you want to ask questions about, how much they think about their space. Like, and very, very typical product questions. And you should ask that even to the CTO. Let's say if this role is under a CTO, right? Or a CMO. Like, how do they think about their customers? How do they think about their ideal customer profile? How do they think about their problems? How do they think about their market? And what does winning look? And if at the end of the day you are getting the base, like the core elements of that answer, which they're like, no, we are grounded in our market. We truly understand what the problem is, and we work backwards from that. That allows you to know, like, okay, they're anchored the right way. right? Even though they may not have the title for it, but they're anchored the right way. And that's what you want to know for, right? Because then makes sense for you to do that. And then depending on the company, that could be an opportunity. That could be an opportunity for you to drive up the maturity of the company in the product terms and actually become that, right? I've known people who've been like early hires or early product people at a company, and then over time form that. When I joined Wiser, there were three people on my team, right? And we actually formed that over time, right? And that became much bigger, right? So that's part of that journey, right? So I think you have to assess how product aware, and within that, I mean how market aware, or customer aware, or problem aware the company is, and then work backwards from that.
Mhm.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. But
That's really
Abhishek,
fun.
do you feel in such kind of scenarios where the org that you are currently present in is not being led by a product leader, the autonomy of product managers is not same as you have with your engineering counterparts? Like most decisions are being taken care by the engineering people, and product people are mostly responsible for bridging the gaps, etc. Do you feel that is the case, or that is also company dependent? I understand Stripe, you gave the example of Stripe, that's an excellent example. But the more people I talk to, specifically our friends who have been joining different companies, one pattern that we usually observe is if the product manager is reporting to the product org, it definitely has a greater say where you have the autonomy, you can make decisions, you can come up with more features or enhancements, etc. And for other places, it may not be that easy for a product guy to rise up the ranks and share their opinion on the table. Just our
Yeah,
observation.
no, that is I've seen that before with folks I know. I've seen that in my past lives too. Um, I think it's there's no uniform answer
Yeah.
there. I think it definitely is company dependent, depending on how they've grown up and then they make those decisions. I think and yeah, it could feel sometimes that you do not have the autonomy. But I think end of the day, and of course, if you're early in that and if you can actually figure that out, then make the right decision for sure, by all
Mhm.
means. But I think there is other side to this coin too, right? Some of the superpowers as a PM you want to cultivate are powers of evangelism, are powers of influencing, are powers of convincing, right? So when I look at these kind of situations, right, for a a positive growth minded individual, this is prime real estate to go do that, right? So
Mhm.
that's another way to kind of look at that, like, okay, how do I go drive that? Because end of the day, you can think of it like, oh, me or my boss are able to make those calls, but like what's beneficial for the business? How do we actually get to the right goal, and how do I actually influence people to achieve that goal, right? And now this setup allows you to go do more of that. Because if you actually
Mhm.
had a CPO or that org structure which actually ran that, you didn't have to do much of that, right? So,
Yeah.
that's already kind of baked in, which is also good, which you also eventually want. But then this is also an opportunity for you to go drive
Yes.
that, right? So that's the other way to think about this. I
Yeah.
I realize like that's better said than done, but it's not always possible. But if where it is, you should definitely try that, right?
Absolutely, that makes sense.
No, that's very true. I mean, converting challenges into opportunities or converting opportunities into challenges is up to the individual. Yeah. Um, so Abhishek, we have a very fun rapid fire round also planned for the podcast. But before I go there, I have one more question in this particular topic where we are. So now we are understanding more from a lens of a CPO or from a senior leadership team. What are they looking for? But also give some perspective when you're looking to expand your team, because now you're leading an org itself. There are multiple folks who report at multiple levels. At what point or at what particular work which you need to get done you look for hiring early career product managers? Because there's a constant challenge in the industry that hey, you need to have certain experience, either it can be an industry experience or product experience in general. And there comes the chicken egg problem, that how do new people enter into the space? So what are your takes on it, or what type of work is generally required to be done from an early career product manager, and that's when you look to hire those type of roles?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, multiple parts maybe. So I think number one, I think from a if I was an early PM, right? there are naturally certain companies which are very well suited to do that because they have like an APM program, a rotational program, and so on. So if you're fortunate enough to break through into that, that would be a great entryway to kind of get into that, right?
Mm.
The second way to think about it is to think about from a perspective of from a leader's perspective, like where you do that, right? I think as a leader, when you actually hire somebody in early stage, the first question you should ask is not about the candidate, it's about yourself. Because what happens is, if you hire somebody early stage, you have to ensure that you have enough bandwidth to coach them, right? I think one of the worst things we could do as leaders, and look, I made those mistakes too, is to hire somebody early stage and actually not give them enough room and bandwidth to go get them grow, right? And that's not right either, right? So what happens is, depending on the situation, you wanna let's say, for example, there's a new business unit I have and I need somebody to go really understand the strategy, go talk to the team members, figure out and navigate through a complex stakeholder network and figure that out. I'm definitely going to get somebody who's experienced to do that, right? Because then otherwise they'll actually hold their ground, they can figure those things out, right?
Mm.
Now, within that, let's say if you're starting off something new, right? And that's something which we want to be able to build over time. Then there are opportunities to have somebody who's interested in that role within the company, who's probably aware of it, or somebody new who can actually join. Now,
Mhm.
the third part is, what should you have at the very least, right, in my mind, to be able to be able to do that, and that what I look for, right? And
Mhm.
these things, because these things can be there even without experience, right? And for example, like at the very base level, if you think about this as a almost like a pyramid, like you need to have passion and ownership mindset and integrity, right? Like these are the key things which you want for any employee, by the way, right? But
Mm.
passion and ownership mindset takes you a whole long way, right? It takes you for all the distance, because I think that's an essential quality for a PM to have, because you have to figure out answers, you have to navigate to tough problems, and you have to figure out how to make the company successful. And having that owner mindset and that passion to go achieve that is absolutely critical. So that's kind
Mm.
of what we look at. The second bit is having being data driven and being and having an execution bias, right?
Mm.
And data driven is another one. Like, how well you think in terms of data, and can you actually navigate between opinion and data, right? And parse through that and actually help make those decisions, right? And I think as a new PM, as an early PM, how do you cultivate that, right? And there are enough opportunities for you to do that. Like, it could easily start with the resume, right? Like how many data points,
Mm.
quantifiable data points you have in a resume. And it's easy. People pick up on that. People read that. They're like, oh, this is the impact you had, and this is measurable in that way. That now you're making a point,
Mm.
right? So that's one thing. And then bias for execution. Bias for execution comes with experience, but you could actually talk about things which you've done, talk about actually experiments you've ran, right? So I would say these are the things where we look at. And then within the company, what we would do is, depending on the situation within the company, if it's a new thing, a new emerging product where we know we have to do a experiment and kind of have the room and can coach the individual, that's where we would go higher.
Mm.
And I'm talking about mid-sized to small-sized company, but a
Yeah.
larger company has a much better APM kind of program. That's a very different deal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we think about it. If that's actually
Mm.
helpful, yeah.
Hmm. No, that definitely helps. But also, right now, my biggest dilemma is there's so many people out there, and there's so much of material out there to learn how to crack these interviews. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I feel now it's becoming easier and easier to fake it during the interview because you can practice so much, you can easily fake it for an hour, right? So then it becomes challenging for the recruiter to find the cream from the noise. And I don't know how it's happening. For me today, to be very candid, I think it's mostly luck. That's how I'm driving it. So, what's your take into this?
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good observation. And I think there is so much content about, and this, I think we were talking about this earlier. There's so much content about being a PM versus
Yeah.
succeeding as a PM, right? And
Exactly.
and 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 I think and that just reflects the state of the industry right now because people just want to
Mhm.
get into it. They think that it's a sexy role. They think it's a stepping stone towards becoming a founder themselves because they want to run a business. So all of those things actually come into play. You are absolutely right. It is hard, and I think being on the other side when we hire people, right? I occasionally remind the my team and plus the stakeholders who actually interview that when you make a mistake hiring a PM, it's actually very hard and hard on the company. See, when you
Yeah.
let's say you make a mistake with an engineer, fairly soon
Mhm.
you can see it in the code, right? But because they produce
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Similarly, when you hire a salesperson, there are numbers to be made, right? Fairly soon you can see that. A
Yes.
bad PM hire takes months, couple of quarters to
Yeah.
actually figure that out. So
Mhm.
that mistake is costly, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is you have to kind of devise methods, but you're right, and it's getting harder and harder because people can talk their way through it, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, famously, product sense is one of the key elements of that, right? and
Mhm.
and you know but everybody's figured that out now to how to talk through that.
Exactly.
Everybody has their favorite product ready to go, right? And
Mhm.
as interviewers you have to come up with these interesting newer ways to kind of do that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So but yeah,
Mhm.
it's definitely getting harder and harder. And I think I'm not sure how this will evolve further, but I also I'm a thread in my head going on is basically with, and we might be able to talk about AI later, but one, as AI evolves and as the ability to build products actually changes, a good product person can actually demonstrate their skills differently too, right?
Yeah.
By
Absolutely.
building
Yes.
things, right? So if you're
Mhm.
truly a builder and actually or a problem solver, more importantly, right? There may be other
Mhm.
ways to differentiate. Like, look what I've built. Like in my past, I've
Mhm.
done a lot of side projects, by the way, right? Which allowed me to kind of keep in touch with the technology and really look to solve problems, right? And that could become a differentiating thing, right? Yes, you can answer
Mhm.
all those questions, but actually show me something you built on your
True.
own
True.
and actually end to end, and that allows you to actually parse deeper. And many companies actually
Mhm.
ask those questions, talk about experience, and go deeper and deeper and deeper to clarify, right? And I think it'll,
Mhm.
it'll evolve in that fashion. But present state, completely agree with you. It's hard. It's very hard. There
Yeah.
is a lot of luck involved, and yeah, I think we need to kind of get out of that
Mhm.
slowly but surely to get to a better place.
Mhm. No, thank you so much for your suggestions there. I mean, this is what at least I also, if I'm speaking to someone, I generally recommend that hey, do some side projects, show some capabilities more than your resume there. Okay, let's move towards the rapid fire round because post rapid fire round we have a lot to cover with Abhishek. We are super excited to know more about your operating system framework which you have. So we'll come to that, but this is a quick rapid fire round. We have like a couple of questions to ask to you. We just want to understand like what comes to the top of your mind when we put these questions to someone like you, so that we understand like what's your thought process like and what are the things you generally refer to in your life. Um, so the first question we'll start is a typical interview question, which everyone asks, right? Your favorite product, but we would love to know what was your first product you fell in love with.
My first product I fell in love with. Very so top of my head, without much thought, I'll so the so I because I have my history of building the camera phone, right? The
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
recent product which comes to mind was Google Photos, because Google Photos, and I think the iPhotos has caught up now, but Google Photos was one of the first breakthrough, allowed you to actually really relive your memories and not have to worry about organizing pictures, albums, and those kind of things. And it said like, hey, we got it. We have unlimited storage. We don't worry about storage. Don't worry about organizing. You can simply search whatever you want. And they had the early AI capability of like you can actually search things like hugs on a beach, right? And you can actually see people
Yeah.
doing that. And that was actually, even complex queries like that. And that the
Mm-hmm.
reason I like it is because I felt that was one of the products which not only solved the pain point, but delivered joy. And very few
Yes.
products can actually deliver joy. And I think that's where I
Mm-hmm.
saw that, and it still is one of the near and dear to my heart, Google
Mhm.
Photos. And I think that's, any photos product has an opportunity like that. But yeah, that would be the answer to your
And I
question.
think with Google Photos, another interesting point is that also came to Google as a side project. Someone was working on a side project. They have this garage something within Google
Mm.
where you can work on, and that actually became a full-fledged product. So that definitely answered the question of why it's bringing joy, because I think that was the motive behind building it.
Yeah. Mhm. Nice. So the next one is, what's one stereotype about product management which you think needs to go away?
Tough interview questions, Abhishek.
Yeah, no, I know. Maybe I'm trying to choose the one from many. No, I think one of the things would be that, and we are also trying to improve ourselves on this one right now, is I think often what happens is companies and especially the teams look at product managers like, oh, you write the specs, you write the stories, or you write the requirements, and you throw it over the wall, I'll go build it, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yes, responsibility wise, that's how things fall into it. But I think what needs to change is how companies and teams build products and how aware they are, right? So yes, a responsibility of writing stories or requirements falls on the PM, but I think the responsibility or owning that entire like user problem and what that solves should be for the entire team. And I think that mindset change needs to happen. And by the way, Marty Kagan should be credited with that. Actually, he's been talking about that through his books around Inspired, Transformed, and all that. And candidly, we've been trying to do that too. And what we've seen is the tech industry, most part, kind of evolved from like, here's the requirements, go build it, right? And I think we want to change from that, which is that everybody's more product aware, problem aware, right? And they're able to do that. Because what happens is, as a PM, you write the story, right? And somebody will just go build that. But end of the day, when they are making decisions when something comes up, and if you have a more informed individual who's actually doing the work, right, who is much more empowered, can make the right decision. And that's what you wanna aspire to, right? So I think
And
that is a big mental shift which I would love teams to change, and that those teams become very successful teams.
Mhm.
and I think that's something that I've personally observed when I work with engineers who usually have this ownership mindset. Whatever they are building, they usually understand the business behind it, try solving it from there, and actually own the product. The ultimate outcome that comes up is within time, and also the quality is definitely better as compared to
Mhm.
working with someone who is not taking that
And
approach.
in fact, your Google Photos example, that also reminds me when some of the best and most innovative work has been done when I've had like engineers come to me, it's like, hey, I was thinking more about the problem. Here, I have another solution which nobody else has thought of, and actually is 10 times
Mhm.
better,
Exactly.
right? And
Mhm.
that breakthrough only happens if if the team is problem aware, right?
Exactly.
So as a PM, you want to strive hard for that. Like, how do you
Absolutely.
Mhm.
actually inject that? How do you actually incept them with that
Yeah.
understanding?
And
Mhm.
how do you do that, Abhishek, from your experience?
It's very hard. It's very hard. I think what you want to do is basically, um, first, like from a structural perspective, have a really good discovery process. First of all, as a PM, you should know that, right?
Mhm.
And so often what happens is business pressures and other things get into your way. But how do you actually stick to good discovery practices? How do you make sure you're talking to your users, your stakeholders, and actually understanding what needs to happen? And then how do you represent that within within the company and actually become the voice of the user? You plus the designer and the tech lead, how do you become the voice of the user and have in the discovery process inform your team and educate them with that. Now, what we do is we have a very, somewhat mature of a discovery process compared to the industry and what I'm saying. And what we do is basically we have problem discovery, we have solution discovery, then the solution design. Each step of the way, we are actually trying to capture the user needs, answering the critical
Mhm.
business questions, the why behind it. And that process tends to involve the stakeholders, and at the right time tends to involve the team, and then educate them, and then here's what we're trying to build. And the objective on that is not to build a feature. This is another part of like, and you may have heard this in the where people who are talking about the new way of doing a roadmap, where you have an outcome-based roadmap. So the success of, by the way, I don't know why this thing keeps doing the thumbs up and thumbs down, but the success of what you're trying to accomplish is by that outcome. If the feature or whatever you're trying to build gets adopted and actually does have the business impact. And if everybody is, so like we also do OKRs, which are outcome focused. Like, did it have the business impact? And that could easily mean that you probably have to write 5 different versions of this and throw away something to get to that business impact. So that's the other way to think about that, right?
Yes.
So discovery process, educating everybody internally, and then setting the sights on the outcome. Those are the basic things you have to do. But then again, you have to keep training people. You have to keep educating people depending on where they come from. Some people naturally gravitate towards. Some people need to be brought in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I think that's a very powerful explanation, Abhishek. In fact, while you were mentioning this, the problem discovery and solution discovery framework, Rahul and I was discussing yesterday. You have worked across both B2B and B2C teams. So once we complete this fireside chat, we would love to understand how does the product problem and solution discovery differs in a B2C environment versus a B2B environment where the sales team involved, etc. But
Yeah.
going forward with the fireside.
No, sure. Last question before we move to our discussion where we would want to touch these pointers. Actually, I have two. Let's cover both. So the first one, or the second last one, would be if you could give one line of advice to a PM who is just starting out, what would that be?
And I'll just add I'll make the question more difficult for Abhishek. Abhishek, also please include in the AI era, what should a PM who is starting their career do? And should they be concerned about what is happening in the AI or not? Or should it just be an organic journey and learning on the go?
So before I give that one sentence, I think let's make some assumption here that this is an individual who knows why they're becoming a product person, right?
Yes.
Because if they don't know, that would be my first advice actually.
Yeah.
Just go find out the why. So let's assume that they know. I think my one sentence would be ground yourself on the problem. Focus on the problem. Just go focus on the problem. And let me give a little bit more explanation why that is. You just mentioned AI. The landscape is shifting so rapidly right now, and what's possible. So the possibility on solutioning is just going through the roof right now, right?
Yes.
So you want to ground yourself on things which don't change, right? So the problem is where you want to ground yourself in. And then once you do that, you can figure out how do you solve it, right? So at the end of the day, that problem is where value is delivered. And for that value, you monetize it and your company is rewarded for that, right? Or you are rewarded for that. So always ground in the problem. Whether AI can solve it or not, that's a secondary question. But and let's say it does, right? The problem is still what you want to solve. And deeply understand the problem, right? So always grounding yourself in the problem is a good word of advice.
But Abhishek, do you see scenario changing a bit because of this AI burst which has come, that rather than finding a solution to the problem, it's opposite way. The people have a solution and now they're finding a problem so that they can put the AI term in that, right? So as a someone who is early in the career, right? So for example, if your company is top down in terms of the bigger project, generally that's how it works, right? For bigger projects, it comes from top down. And sometimes the requirement is, hey, we need to position ourselves as a AI first company or AI driven company, meaning that solution comes first and then we start figuring out the problem around it. So how, what would you recommend, like someone who is early in the career, they need to follow things which are coming from top, they also need to make sure that they're doing the right justification to their customers and they learn in the journey. So how to navigate this part?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a complex question, and I think even to make it more complex, beyond just your management asking, if your customers are asking for it because they've heard this cool thing called AI, how can it solve my problem, right?
Yep.
So
Yes.
I think it is tough, and look, we're not dealing with solutions first problem right now. Like it's been there for a long time. Like Y Combinator talks about it, right? Make things which people want, right? Like, so I think you always want to ground yourself there. But I think what happens is, and there is a bit about any PM now needs to be AI powered themselves in many different ways, and we can talk about that in detail. But they need to be AI powered. But again, bring it back to the problem. So yes, you've been asked to look into AI by your management, by your customer. In fact, even before they've asked you, you should be thinking about that already, right? Because I think you suddenly have this almost magical way to solve a problem, right? So how does that transform the solution to that problem, right? Today, if that solution requires a customer or a user to come in and spend an hour dissecting through some data points and figuring that out, could you just apply a LLM and actually make that a very simple interface and just bring up the nuggets for them, which can be consumed in seconds? That would be an amazing way to solve that problem. But the problem's still there, right? But you're grounding yourself in the problem. So I think back to the previous advice, if you are grounded in that problem, you will see these things as an opportunity to solve it, right? And I think what people run up against is when they see like, okay, I don't know, I have to put a solution around AI. And I think that's the weird way of going about it, because I think then you're just bolstering that on, and you'll see this in many companies. You go to their website, the word AI is just plastered all over, right? And you
Yep.
you don't want to do that, because I think as the industry, as the broader market and many verticals get smarter about that, they'll know exactly what that means. They'll parse that. We are in this blip right now. They'll parse that, and then they'll know the truly AI driven solutions where value is created. Like nobody says we have a digital product anymore. It's a given, right? So at some point, AI will reach that stage where people will know that, hey, you don't need to market under the term AI, but like just tell me how you're, you know, solving my problem. So as a PM, first and foremost, you get up to speed with that. You get ahead of that. In fact, what happens is your ability to understand the solutions in the market, understand how it can solve a problem, is much higher than even anybody in your management chain, just because you have more bandwidth to apply to that, right? And this grassroots movement is actually very important, and understanding what happens, and then you can actually lead the way even before somebody asks you to do so, right? But then again, let's say you're asked that again, don't think of AI first. Think about the problem first. I have this problem. How can I solve this problem? How can I solve it differently? If it's a data problem or if it's an assessment problem, how can I apply the agents, or how can I assess the data, whatever that shape that takes? How can I solve the problem? So again, being grounding on problem and then applying that solution is absolutely the way to do it.
I think that's
Perfect.
a very interesting take,
Okay.
Abhishek. Perfect. So, as we are approaching to the final section of our podcast, Abhishek, um, reeling back to the question, what are some habits, Abhishek, that you possessed as a product manager throughout your career, which has immensely helped you in the product management journey? And we want to understand it from the lens of early stage PMs on what can they implement or what habits can they just inculcate in the early career, which can really help them when they become product leaders in the future.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think three things come to mind. Number one is curiosity. Just stay curious. Understand. Understand every aspect of,
Hmm.
right. And by the way, as I said before, passion and ownership mindset, you have to have that, right? And growth mindset, you have to have that. But then be curious. Like one of the initial things, and that's how I transitioned into a product role, was I was curious about the business needs. I was a person who was running an engineering team, but I was curious about the business needs. I would actually go and spend weeks with the customers actually to talk through that and understand that. And that was part of my engineering role. But then I actually got familiar with it and understood that, and understood like how decisions are made, what business decisions is impacting, and the curiosity helped me see the broader picture. So if you're curious about it and understand beyond just the products and features, understand how the impact is made to the customer's life, then also understand the impact of the business. So understanding like how does go to market or sales gets impacted? How does operations get impacted? How does marketing get impacted? Understanding how they are doing things will help you become a much better product person because you will understand the entire business. So being a great product manager is not just features. You have to understand the business and make that successful. Features are just a way to do that. Your product is just a tool to get to that, right? Your end goal is making the business successful, right? So that curiosity is absolutely, absolutely critical. The second thing which comes to mind is um, being inquisitive and actually trying to see how, maybe to eliminate your own biases or being able to change your own mind, right? Own mindset. And because often you're faced with situations, and we talked about earlier situations which are difficult situations, right? How do you convert that into an opportunity? How do you see what you can actually uh, get out of that, right? Um, like I've been through several journeys. Like in my recent journey, we've acquired a few companies as part of our growth strategy, and I've been part of acquisitions before, but we've done more acquisitions in this company than before. And I had to go through a mindset shift myself to figure out like how this can be an enabler and how we can actually capitalize on that. Because it's a complex journey. Everything is complex, right? But how do you actually make that work for you? Right? But that act of actually revisiting that, understanding that. And what I say is the way to do that, by the way, as a product manager, is that every now and then, every quarter or every month, however works for you, take some time to yourself. Take X percentage of time, a day or a Friday here and there. What you want to do is just zoom out and actually think about the broader picture and zoom out and whatever level you want to zoom out, however you want to do it, right? But zoom out and take that time because what happens is we are we are so busy with things we miss the forest from the trees, right? So having that ability to and that doing that actually allows you to do the mindset shift because then it rewires you like, okay, here's what the most important thing is, and that's what I want to go accomplish, right? So I would say curiosity, mindset shift are the things which actually help in my journey to kind of to get to the place I'm at. And the third thing I would say is people, right? End of the day, a good product person, right? As we were saying, right? We have no authority, right? You have to get work done from people who don't report to you, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you actually do that, right? How do you influence them? And learn the art of influencing and evangelizing, right? And get mentored in that. Get comfortable with that. Fail there. That's okay. And you will fail there, right? But that's okay. And that act of doing that and changing people's minds is going to be very, very fruitful in the long run.
No, this is really powerful. I mean, curiosity, changing your own mindset and evolving yourself, and then influencing people around you to make sure they get incentivized or they get motivated to get into the vision which you have. Truly amazing. I mean, Abhishek, since we are on top of the hour, I know we might go out of time, but before we end the podcast, one last discussion which I definitely want to have is to get a bit more understanding from you on what exactly the operating system mindset or the operating system which we discussed in our intro call was all about. If you can maybe give a glimpse of it, what was the thought process behind it? How can it help early career product manager in general? We can touch base on it now, and maybe we should do a part two of this discussion to cover that.
That's what I was feeling, Abhishek. Just saw the time and I'm like, oh my god, it's already been 45 minutes, and it doesn't feel like it feels like we
Yeah.
can just continue this conversation for one more hour. Maybe we can have a part two of this episode. But yeah, for now we'll love to know more about the operating system.
Absolutely. And there are so many rich topics to cover right here. So let me touch on the operating system. So I think what started happening with me was over time, and this is probably before Marty Kagan or Shreyas Doshi or other resources kind of became commonplace. Now you have access to more resources, right? And even Teresa Torres, who does the product discovery, right? And I started kind of collecting best practices, right? Best practices around how to get customer feedback, right? Best practices actually even before that. How do you think like a product person, right? How do you, what right mindset? How do you have a team? How do you align people? How do you build a roadmap? How do you communicate? How do you go about doing discovery? How do you execute things? Once you execute things, how do you actually now provide regular updates to your stakeholders and your management, right? Over time, I started collecting these best practices. And then what I did eventually was trying to put this together in what I call the product operating system. Now, the set of contents right here is basically collected, which we now actually have organized in a almost 150 slide deck, which is essentially a book at this point, right? Which takes best practices from several individuals in the industry, right? It borrows from Marty Kagan, it borrows from Teresa Torres, it borrows from design principles, right? And brings that together and says to any incoming PM, here's how you now, like, you want to go do customer learning, here's how you go do that. Here's how we do roadmaps, here's how we align people with the roadmaps, right? Here's how we actually bring people together and inform them. How do you regularly communicate them with them? How do you do product reviews, right? How do you actually do discovery? How do you do story writing, right? How do you do design work? Those kind of things is fully documented out to do that. And that's been a quest because back to the point I mentioned about driving up the product maturity is because is is to have these key foundational elements in place, which allows product folks to come in and say, okay, here's how we run this here, right?
Mhm.
Secondly, it's actually the way I've phrased it, it's a handbook for product trios. So meaning the product technical lead and the design manager. So we internally have a squad model, right? Headed by the three individuals. So it's actually for them because they have combined ownership of the product, right? And
Mhm.
then finally, there are elements within that operating system which has been useful to other members of our teams, which are basically like, how do you engage in a roadmap? How do you, let's say, if you are part of a go to market membership, if you're a customer success head and retention is key to you, how do you engage in that? How do you make sure that the roadmap actually accounts for it, right? Same thing on the operations and engineering side. And often it's tough. Often there are visibility challenges, right? So how do you solve that? So this operating system actually brings all those things together and actually has that as a playbook almost or a handbook for people to go follow. And my job is to kind of keep evolving it even with my leadership and keep implementing and making sure that we are refining it, improving it, and executing to create that value.
Mhm. No, this completely sounds like a gold resource for anyone in the product space. Hopefully soon we'll get access to it and we can also learn more because every time we're struggling to because so there are two problems. Maybe you started when there was limited resources, but now there is too much of resources out there. So finding the best one out there becomes a challenge.
And very many thing on that, like for example, prioritization matrix. There is
Mhm.
all sorts of prioritization things, like rice and this and that, right? The the challenge is which one do you want to apply to your company where it's at and what
Exactly.
works for
Exactly.
you and your company. I think that's where the challenge is. So I think that's the other thing.
Mhm.
Like I've been thinking about how do I take this operating system and actually put it somewhere like on a blog or something of that sort. But then
Mhm.
also it has to be that context of your company and
Yeah.
B2B or B2C and all that stuff has to be factored in
Mhm.
within that. Yes.
You know what, Abhishek? One thing that me and Rahul were experimenting with was we used Gen AI. What we did was we we culminated all the discussions that we had in our 25-30 episodes, fed it to the Gen AI model, just trained it with our data. And now, based on different parameters like what industry are you in, fintech, edtech, etc., what kind of role are you currently in, senior PM, CPU, etc., based on those parameters, there's a chatbot which can answer you questions. And that was very fruitful. We just tested out with
Yeah.
few of our community and it was working great. We'll definitely share that link with you also, tested out. But I think something similar can be really helpful for the product operating model that you created. A chatbot which can first ask questions and get context about what situation you are currently in, and then tell you tailored advice based on
Mhm.
your expertise and your years of
Correct.
experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, this is like instead of writing a blog post, really, that's what you do. That's how it evolves.
Yeah.
But I think one thing I would just call out within that is let's take about the prioritization framework, right? You can ask the chatbot a question about that, and you can come up, and there are a bunch of tools, product board, aha, or like even an Excel sheet would do. But see, but that's not the key problem there. The prioritization of the key thing which you want to accomplish behind prioritization is that the stakeholders who you're working with have complete comfort level and trust, and your executives have trust that you're building the right thing, right? So the framework is not the goal. That trust is the goal, right?
Yes.
And so much so that, like, let's say you have a team which comes in like, hey, I want to get this done. I want to put this in the roadmap. But if they understand the context of the roadmap, and maybe their prized feature actually takes a backseat, but they fully understand what's in the interest of the company, right? And then they're willing to be okay with not having the feature. That's the best prioritization method,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
so I would say that's again what's the end problem you're trying to achieve, like to solve for, right? You can move things around on a spreadsheet any which way, but what gets you that trust is
Yeah.
what you. So sometimes what happens is friction is actually helpful because friction helps you learn nuances of a problem a lot more, right?
Exactly.
So again, we as we solve things, right? So we want to solve this and reduce friction, but sometimes that's actually helpful.
No, this is very true. And Utkarsh, this belongs to our discussion yesterday we were having, right? Why do we need to learn framework when we are not even using those?
Yeah.
I mean, the goal is not to use the framework. The goal
I,
is
you
to
know,
get the output.
exactly. Abhishek, on a lighter note, I was telling Rahul, we went CMU, we learned all those kind of frameworks, RISE framework, this framework, that framework. What framework are you using right now in your job? Tell me that. Uh, and we're like, okay, we'll ask Abhishek, like he being someone who actually makes decision, and as Rahul mentioned, predicting is something that the CPO is responsible for taking the decisions. But I think this has been a really fruitful conversation, Abhishek. We really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure once we have that product operating model that we can share with the audience, and we have more questions coming in from the community, we can plan another podcast session with you if time permits and you have some availability. But other than that, it was wonderful connecting with you, Abhishek.
It was great talking to both of you, and I must say that you both might be early in your careers, but you don't come across that way. I have to give you that. You do not come across that way. I often hire individuals, like, and my flag's going up internally, right? Like, my green flag is going up internally. So I must give you that. And I think this is also, a sign of times where how much evolution of the space has happened, right? And so I'm very happy to like do more sessions and can I give back and help aspiring PMs to get to the place they want.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Abhishek. This officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Hope our listeners have enjoyed the conversation and they'll get a lot of value out of it. To all the listeners out there, stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Stay tuned with Product Unfiltered. We're going to bring more and more such conversations. We know we've taken a break and we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community to bring in more episodes. Working on that. Soon you'll be seeing more and more coming out of it. Stay tuned to Product Unfiltered.
Thank you.